Hello, folks. Well, this clip should be pretty short. When I was looking through it, it looks like a lot of or not a lot of, some of the images are similar or the same as in the previous document. So I don't want to waste your time here, but we'll just zip through this. This is a lipid, right? It's not a triglyceride. It's a phospholipid. You see the hydrocarbon tails. There are two of them. And then there's a phosphate group for the head. So that's the polar head and the two nonpolar tails. Here, again, we're looking at a lipid because we have 4 fused rings of hydrocarbon. So we're looking at cholesterol. Man, we're on a lipid roll here. So here's another lipid. It's a bunch of phospholipids. So here, in this first image you looked at, it's a single phospholipid. But then if we look at the image on the far right of the document there, it's several phospholipids arranged in a bilayer. Let's see. With this image here, we saw that one earlier as well. It's CHO, but you have equal amounts of oxygen and carbon, so it's a carb that's in a straight chain. So it's a carb. This is also a stylized version of a carb. We saw this image previously. It's CHO, but it's not a lot of O, and it's a glycerol and 3 fatty acid chains. That's a triglyceride, storing energy in fats. This image here, it's a carb. It's CHO with a lot of O, and it's in a ring, so that's a monosaccharide. This is in the protein category. Specifically, it's a single amino acid. You got an amino group. Oops, here's the amino group, the carboxyl group, alpha carbon, and here's the R group. This image, again, we saw that before. It's in the lipid category. This is a cholesterol. It's 4 fused rings of hydrocarbon. This is another version of that. Again, 4 fused rings, but the shape has changed slightly. Let's move on up the image here. Ooh, let me clean off some of that. All right, what are we looking at? Now some new stuff. This is another example of a carb. CHO with a lot of O, but it's in a straight chain. So again, it's sort of the anhydrous version of that. This is a protein looking at a single amino acid. Notice that they've rearranged this a little bit in terms of how it's represented. Here's the carboxyl group here. Here's the amino group here. This is the alpha carbon, and then that is your R group. This is another carb, CHO with a lot of O, which is represented in a straight chain rather than a ring. This is another amino acid, amino group, carboxyl group, alpha carbon, R group. Hey, that one's got sulfur. It's CHO with a lot of O in rings. This is a disaccharide, a version of a carb. It's like sucrose, table sugar. This image, this is a nucleic acid. It's a nucleic acid because it's got CHOMP, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. The nitrogen is seen in the nitrogenous bases, and there's the phosphate group that makes up part of the sugar phosphate backbone, and there's the sugar part of the sugar phosphate backbone. So that's looking at one nucleotide in like DNA or RNA. Now this looks at just the nitrogenous base. Again, rings of nitrogen typically indicate, a ring of nitrogen by itself typically indicates a nitrogenous base, which is in the nucleic acid category. And what do we got left here? We're just looking at an amino acid again. Again, amino group, carboxyl group, alpha carbon, R group. So practice, practice, practice. You just got to be able to look at these things, know what they are, know what they do, know what they're made of, that kind of stuff. If you have questions on things after you've been reviewing and working on stuff, let me know. We'll work through it, okay? You'll get there with practice, I promise.